Hi guys, this is episode 1 of my series where I'm going to be breaking apart After the Flash's code from the different live streams to sort of point out some things that could have been done better and to show how the game itself is not the best coded. This is not meant to downplay Chad the creator's creation, but merely to just show how it could have been done better. We're going to start with image number 1. All of these images are going to be captured from either the Discord server or from live streams, so there will not be any, decompiling the game's code. I would love to actually go in there and see the full thing, but we unfortunately do not have that. So, some things in here are going to be up to interpretation. So we're going to have to try and assume if it's server, client, all that stuff. We're going to start with this image right here. There's a few things wrong here. We're going to start with this top thing right here with the big else-if blocks. Besides being unreadable, which it has a bit of a problem with, which I can tolerate, we know something here. Else if func equals random scenario. Why do I point this out? The issue is when you're doing an else if check, you're going to be checking if this, then this does one check. But if this is not true, it will go down the block and check this next thing. However, this takes lots of processing and is linear, meaning if you have a large enough else if block, or one that's run a lot, it's going to hammer your times. For a case like this, we would want to use a makeshift kind of case switch. A case switch in coding is just a way to handle chained events like this without having to go through a massive else if block. So in this instance, we're going to look at func name. So we're going to do this, and then we're going to grab random scenario. With this, what we can do then later is we can, once let me add a default case here, you'll see why in a second. In our function, we can do local module equals this, and then function module dot do action. Action, string, and then we're going to add ... This is because we don't know what variables are being passed, so I'm going to take an assumption of what we might be getting. So, what we can do here is, assuming we need to run code afterwards, we can do this. Local args, or returns, I guess we'll just call it that, should equal switch action. This will say we have our switch action, and what this now does is, assuming that each of these have different amounts of returns and stuff, we want to make sure we can account for all of that. So, we are going to do something like this, where we put them inside of a table. Later on, we can then do unpack returns, and this will give us back all of our tuples, which is where the value is returned. So, and we're also going to add something here where or switch.defaults. So this does the same thing, essentially, where we can do local args should equal unpack returns. Again, we don't need to do this. This is just in case we need to get those values. You can just as easily just run the code without having any returns at all, and you could... That's basically it. Inside of these, we can then add our code where we can reference ... And we can do something like print ... This just means we have any number of past values to here. That's the first thing I would have done differently there. Another issue with this code is we're going to then reference this right here. Game.replicated storage.remotes join server invoke server. There's a big issue with this. Every time you want to get this event, you're going to need to re-index the remote function section, which is going to be a lot of processing. It may not be noticeable, but eventually builds up, especially if this is running on server context. What we would want to do here is we'll first want to get replicated storage. Then we're going to want to get our remote section. So we're going to get local remotes should equal replicated storage, wait for child, remotes. This would only be used if it's the client context. We can improve this by doing something like this, we'll go to the top of our code, and we'll do local run service should equal game get service run service. I'm actually going to move you down for cleaner code because I can't read this very well. What we can do is local remotes should equal run service is server and replicated storage dot remotes or replicated storage wait for child remotes. Assuming we don't preload the remotes folder. If we preload it, this is not going to be necessary. We're doing this in the event that we have never referenced the remotes folder before. And then, since we have error type, we're just going to read US folder. We'll get to the type checking thing later, because I have a whole argument for that. But for now, we will ignore this. And then we're going to do local events, which should equal this. So, for this instance, let's say we have to join server. We can do join server should equal remotes, and then we'll do this. We'll do the same thing we did before. You know, honestly, we could probably cache this value so we don't have to run the code every time. So local is server should equal this. Should equal is server. Should equal is server and remotes.join server or remotes wait for child join server. We can ignore this type. Actually, we'll just do this there, so we won't get this. We won't get that error now. So as you can see here, we now check, is it the server? If it is, just grab it right away. We do not need to wait for it. If it's not, we'll then go over here and we'll wait for the child, and then so we can get our types on this, we'll just wrap it in that right there, and we'll add these to this, and we'll add remote function. You could also just say the whole table is both remote functions and remote events. I prefer it this way, though. So now, what we can do is instead of re-indexing this whole thing, making unreadable code, game, the replicated story, blah, 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 we will instead do events.joinServer, invoke server, event name, random, because I don't know. And boom, you can already tell we are looking at much cleaner code than this, with consuming far less lines as well. We could add all of our other stuff for, like, you know, checking all these attributes, but I don't necessarily see the point. The attribute thing, I'm not necessarily sure how I feel about that. It seems like he's storing the server's objects as instances, which could work. I would personally store them as a table and pass it to the client. This doesn't matter, though. This really is up to personal preference. I think it leads to a bit too much like code on the client side, but honestly, it's whatever you want to do. So that's our first thing. We're going to reference now this number 2. You're probably asking, why am I referencing this thing? This looks completely normal. Well, besides the giant layer of end blocks, we're looking at this right here. Player set attribute metavision disabled, OOC enabled, customize disabled, free cam disabled. Why do I care about these? Simple solution. I believe, this is a bit of a guess, I believe this is a server-side script. Why is that important? Server-side scripts mean everything is shared between all of our clients, assuming it's affecting the game. What is looking at right here is we are going to be editing the player's metavision and all these things. My theory is he's probably connecting to when these values are changed to update things on the players. Which is bad, because this means that every single player, upon loading in, they need to then load every single attribute that needs to be loaded. And assuming every object has these attributes, you begin to see how that begins to build up. How I would do it instead is we would create some kind of event. So we're going to create a new event here. So we're going to call this player event. Should equal is server and remotes dot player event or remotes wait for child player event 800. Now what we can do is player event now what we can do is we can do player event Yeah, I'm a bit of an idiot sometimes. Dot on client event. Connect function. So now what we can do is we can now directly update stats. So for example, we can have a cache of local player should equal this. And then we'll do a user ID, since you should try not to pass instances over these. You want to try and find some other way to find it. So we're going to use user ID. And we'll just say it's a string, assuming we convert it to a string. It doesn't really matter. And then we'll do stats. Or we can do stat to update. We're going to do stats fully because I don't feel like typing out all that code. We can then do user ID should equal, players user ID should equal stats. This just will make it so it updates on the client side. Less hemorrhaging for the client to load on initial join. Still is a lot for the server to process, but assuming they don't get changed all too often, it will be better than having to send all of these values the second a player joins. And then, if we want to reference this later, we can do players nil player, since we don't actually have a player, dot data. There. This doesn't actually do anything currently because we don't have anything assigned to it, but you get the idea. It's cleaner and it's less work and for the client to load on initial load. Ignoring all these if blocks, because I frankly don't know what to do, and also the use of the depreciated weight. I don't frankly know. So we're just going to ignore that. Next up, we're going to come here. Now, this is another one of those things where I frankly don't know if this is going to be on the client or the server. So we're going to assume it is the server. What we're looking at here is it seems like this is him loading his mountain system. I bring this up for a very specific reason. The code here, not how I would have done it, but it's fine. I am looking at these right here. This is going to bring us into our type argument. Why do I bring this up? In Lua U specifically, the language Roblox uses, we have something called type annotating. So we can do local value equals nil. Now, this lets us do something else. We can go over here and say it could be a player. And this way, instead of having to manually type out every single value, we can just do this and we get all these autofills. Otherwise, if we get rid of this, we have no idea what the type could be. And it's the same thing for if you pass values to functions. The type solver has to try and solve it, which leads to slower development times since your value has to solve it. And that's what I was doing up here. I referenced the type. It also can help you spot errors in the event that your code might encounter them, which I think would be very useful based on a lot of the errors encountered within the game. Next up, we get right here. And oh boy, this one is going to have a lot about it. Let's start with just the basic of what the fuck? We are looking at many different systems here. Mount.chassis, find first child, wheel attachment, part.name. Now, assuming this is client, which I really, really hope that it's the client and not the server, we are looking at a lot of stuff for trying to find all of these attachments, which technically works, but it raises the question, we've seen in other streams that the mounts are loaded on the server. Why? Why not have the client replicate it and then check the assets before actually doing all this code? He could have an entire function to check for all these assets before allowing it to resume. But I progress. I don't really care about that. We can then scroll down here and we can see it's looking for all of these things. Wheel attachment, part.name. Why are you storing things like this? You should have a clean way of finding all of your parts. So for example, instead of it being mount.chassis, we'll create mount.chassis and then we'll have a folder, wheel attachments. This just will create a cleaner layout for trying to find items in your system. We also have this here, chassis.children. I frankly don't understand why he's doing this. I don't understand why it was done this way. I don't know how I would change it personally, but this just seems like the worst possible way to do things. Thing that land.freeframe. Yeah, I frankly don't understand. we'll back out of here. Now we'll go on for our next one. Number 5. Once again, we encounter the same thing. Why are we waiting for all of these children? If we have our setup function like earlier, why are we yielding for all these children? That's just going to lag our game. This is not an optimal way of doing things. It's unreadable, and I feel like you could just cache seedpart.parent. This seems like an obvious thing, but whatever. It doesn't really matter. I just don't understand why we're doing it this way. Another one. This is really starting to get pissing me off. Why are we having all of these attributes? Why are we not storing this in some kind of table or using object-oriented programming? This way we can store the state. And also, why are we doing success underscore primary object? This is a lot to type, becomes a bit more unreadable. So, I frankly don't know why. We could just store if success is a boolean and then add on a reason in a second variable. If you were using variables, but we're using attributes, which is just... why? Part 7! This right here is... Actually, why did I... Oh yeah, this was what I screenshotted here to show why are you doing it this way. 8,000 lines of code in one module. Typically, when programming, you want to break your things into smaller modules. We're going to do example module.luau. Local module should equal this. Return module. Modules oftentimes have multiple parts to them to make it easier to work with. So we can do require / example module. This is cleaner, and if we make it small enough, easy to work with. When you get up to 8,000 lines, you start to having to question, what is the point? This is unreadable hell. If a bug occurs, you have to scroll quite a while to find said bug. This is, frankly, awful in every way of the term. I mean, come on, what are we looking at here? Not to mention, why are we storing module.player.getAttribute prop count? This is just bad programming. I'm sorry to say it. You could have stored this in a table. Every time the player places something and the remote function returns that it was placed successfully, increase the local counter or use collection service. I wouldn't use collection service, but you could. This is just bad. All bad programming. This is just awful programming on so many levels. Next up we have number 8. This is just hell. I frankly, there could have been a better way. There has to be such a better way to do this. If, for, if. This is just awful. This is just, this is just awful. This is just so awful. If we really were to go in to break this down, we could have done a lot more to go through and fix this, because this is just quite literally some of the worst code I've seen on Yandere dev levels. Physics service.select collection group, insert self parts, click result. What is this? Why was this how it was done? You could have done if this and then have it go underneath or write variables. This is just bad. And once again, we get to another issue of why is there so much indexing? You could store these things. Re-indexing all this makes your code unreadable and hard to work with. It's just bad all around. So let's look at what we have here. We have bad readable code. We have unreadable bad code, barely any type checking, which means slower development, and just awful coding practices. Again, this is not meant to downplay the game at all. Making a game is difficult. This is not the way to go about it, and to claim that you're an expert on programming when you make these flaws just speaks on many different levels. And that will about wrap it up for today. I will be making a second video sometime soon, but until then, I would like you guys to actually look into coding yourself and ponder these things and try to figure out better ways to do them. I will see you guys next time, and I hope you have a great one.